You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Borderlands the pre-sequel had a lot of new weapons added. Of course, the most obvious things are lasers, cryo-weapons, and some of the notable new unique weapons like the Excalibur, Kanada's laser, and the Phrygia. However, there were a lot of weapons that returned from Borderlands 2. While some of these weapons retained their same name, others had slight changes while retaining their same weapon skins, or there were slight alterations to how some of these weapons looked to make them more visually appealing for the pre-sequel. Some of these returning weapons actually ended up being better in Borderlands the pre-sequel due to less competition with similar weapons, or because of the newly added mechanics to the game. So today, I will be going over guns and weapons from Borderlands 2 that actually got better in Borderlands the pre-sequel, and these 9 are some of my favorites, so let's go ahead and we'll get started with number 9, and that's going to be the Striker. Regardless of whether you're playing Borderlands 2 or the pre-sequel, the Striker always seems to be one of 5 legendary shotguns in either game. For the most part, the best shotguns in Borderlands 2 are either unique, seraph, or pearlescent. In the pre-sequel, the Striker's only real competition is the Flacker, Heartbreaker, Bullpup, and Torgue. Otherwise, it's competing with the likes of the Wombat, Moonscaper, and Jacko-Cannon, which you could all argue are pretty lousy. In Borderlands 2, the Striker served as the game's sniper shotgun. Of course, there were other Jacob's legendaries like the Maggie, which was sort of a pistol shotgun, and the Skullmasher, which was a shotgun-style sniper. The problem with the Striker, though, is that it had major recoil problems. When trying to use this gun like a sniper, one shot would produce so much recoil that it would be difficult to reacquire a target. I would say that the Striker is a little bit better in the pre-sequel, though. I guess some of its appeal is that it's a legendary shotgun that can be acquired relatively early on when compared to its Borderlands 2 counterpart, which is obtained as a part of a side quest. While neither weapon is guaranteed to drop, you're more likely to come across the Striker from the pre-sequel than you are the Striker in Borderlands 2. While other shotguns in this game, like the Flare, are better than the Striker, I would still say that the Striker is pretty decent. If you're playing as Nisha, you can greatly improve the magazine size, which was one of its limiting factors from Borderlands 2. My only real complaint is the low projectile count. However, on the flip side of that, you're going to be getting much better ammo consumption per shot when compared to something like the Jacob's Flare, the Scav Boganella, or the Torgue Ravager. If you want one, you can get a Striker from Red Belly in Crisis Scar. Number 8. Torgue-barreled assault rifles. In earlier playthroughs of Borderlands 2, Torgue-barreled assault rifles were fairly well balanced. They dealt more damage when compared to many of their standard assault rifle counterparts. Torgue-barreled assault rifles come in 2 different forms. There are the rocket-based versions, which are the Bandit or Scav rockets, the Torgue Torpedo, and the Vladov Rocketeer. There's also grenade-based assault rifles like the Dahl Grenadier or the Jacob's Cannon, and between the two types, I tend to prefer the rocket versions. However, the issue with Torgue-barreled assault rifles in Borderlands 2 was that they consumed more ammo than their other non-unique counterparts, and they couldn't perform critical hits at higher level difficulties. Of these two factors, the inability to perform a critical hit is what harmed them the most. Thanks to the introduction of cryo elements in the pre-sequel, it's fair to say that the Torgue-barreled assault rifles are much better now, especially if you get pure explosive versions of these weapons. Not only do enemies stay still, which makes hitting them easier, but they also take a lot more explosive damage while frozen. It's also worth mentioning that thanks to Nisha's Tombstone skill, you can perform critical hits with these weapons now. So if you're worried about not being able to crit something, you don't have to worry about it. But like all other non-unique weapons, Torgue-barreled assault rifles are usually obtained as random world drops. Number 7. The Kerboom. So in Borderlands 2, one of the earliest legendaries that you can acquire is the Kerblaster. Early on in the game, the Kerblaster is actually pretty sick. Usually, the initial rocket will wreck whatever is in front of you. However, once you eventually reach Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, you start to realize that the Kerblaster is incapable of performing critical hits, and in order to deal the maximum amount of damage, both the initial as well as the secondary grenade must hit an enemy. What makes this scenario worse is that the Kerblaster only receives grenade damage bonus on the secondary grenade. So if you're playing Axton, you have to hope that the secondary grenade hits enemies in order to take advantage of the massive grenade damage bonus you may have spec'd for. In the pre-sequel, I think the renamed Kerboom is better for a couple reasons. With the introduction of Cryo, it's much easier to get that secondary projectile to hit on target. Not only is the enemy more vulnerable to damage that you're dealing, it's also incapable of moving, so again, it's a lot easier to get that grenade to hit. Plus, you also have to consider that Nisha's Tombstone allows this weapon to crit enemies, where it couldn't previously do that. So, provided you froze an enemy, you get enhanced damage because it's explosive, and you're dealing additional damage because it's a critical hit. So, basically, the Kerboom wrecks frozen enemies. The only downside is that the increase in gravity can sometimes make the secondary projectile less likely to hit. However, I don't think you'll find that that's too much of a problem. If you want a Kerboom, you can get one from Boomer and Outland Spur. Number 6, the Pitchfork. So a decent argument could be made that the Pitchfork was a fairly solid legendary sniper rifle in Borderlands 2. The only problem is that there were just other better sniper rifles out there, like the Lyuda or White Death, the Pimpernel, and the Torgue. The Pitchfork's problem is that at one time it was considered to be one of the best snipers in the game, however the B nerf broke a lot of its functionality. Something very similar happened to Borderlands 2's Skull Masher, which we will go over later. In the pre-sequel, the Pitchfork is up against other snipers like the Magma, aka the nerfed Volcano, and the Omni Cannon, and I would say that between those two, the Pitchfork starts to look pretty good. Sure, you still have your Torgue along with your machine and long-nail sniper rifles, however, I would say that the Pitchfork is a fun alternative for the player to use. Plus, if the enemy you're fighting has a large critical hit spot like Irajira or the Empyrean Sentinel, it's really easy to get those 5 horizontal projectiles during the burst to hit on target and deal critical hit damage. The Pitchfork has always seemed to have been a really good sniper rifle that was just outclassed by a lot of other snipers. Because there's significantly less competition in Borderlands the pre-sequel, the Pitchfork stands out a lot more. The only lousy thing is that you can't farm Terramorphous for this, and it's ultimately a world drop, so if you want a Pitchfork, you're gonna have to get lucky. Number 5, the Skull Masher. So the Skull Masher is basically in the same boat as the Pitchfork from Borderlands 2. Both of these snipers were the best snipers in the game before the B nerf. Because every projectile received full amp damage from the B, you would get 6 projectiles of death with ludicrous damage potential. If just one of these projectiles were to hit an enemy with a fully amped B shield at the time, they would have been dead. Of course, the B nerf pretty much broke the Skull Masher in Borderlands 2, and what you essentially have now is a sniper that only might deal the same amount of damage when compared to a non-unique Purple Rarity Jacob sniper. Borderlands the pre-sequel's version of the Skull Masher is a little better in my opinion. Not only because the pre-sequel's health scaling isn't quite as ridiculous as it was in Borderlands 2, but characters like Nisha can make this weapon's projectiles ricochet very easily thanks to her trickshot skill. Plus, when you combine it with hot lead in areas with atmosphere, you're getting fire damage tacked on as well. And with Nisha, it's possible to fire the Skull Masher at a wall and have it hit something. If you want a Skull Masher, it's a world drop in the pre-sequel, so your best option may be the Grinder in Concordia. Number 4, the Mongol. So the Mongol was one of the 6 legendary rocket launchers in Borderlands 2. While the Mongol was certainly better than the Bunny or the Pyrophobia, you could easily argue that the Mongol was less practical than the Bada Boom, Nukem, and Norfleet launchers. Despite the fact that the Mongol could come in all elements, the Nukem was just easier to use. The Bada Boom was more ammo efficient, and the Norfleet, let's just be real, was the best rocket launcher in the game. For the uninitiated, the Mongol special effect allowed for trailing rockets to spawn, provided the initial rocket traveled far enough. In Borderlands 2, most enemies that you would fight would be relatively close, and it was usually in your best interest to keep enemies as close as possible, negating the need for this effect. However, in Borderlands the pre-sequel, the low-gravity environments actually made the Mongol special effect a lot more practical. Because the Mongol fires more rockets the further it travels, it behooves you to use this launcher in low gravity, where you can easily maximize the distance between you and whoever you're shooting this gun at. As far as a base game rocket launcher goes, the Mongol is one of the more powerful rocket launchers on offer. Then again, you could argue that the other legendary rocket launchers like the Cryophobia, Thingy, and Berrigan are utter crap, while the Bada-Boom, Nukem, and Kanada's Laser are the Mongol's only serious competitors. Of these three, the Bada-Boom is the only other good legendary rocket launcher that can come in all elements. With the removal of the Norfleet in the pre-sequel, along with the introduction of more low-gravity environments, the Mongol is a great option, but the thing is, there is no specific enemy that it drops from, and it is another world drop. Number 3, the Nukem. So the Nukem is a pretty nice rocket launcher in Borderlands 2, and its function is largely unchanged in Borderlands the pre-sequel. It's still an explosive rocket launcher that fires projectiles in an arc that explode like a nuke, dealing a bunch of damage. However, Borderlands the pre-sequel's Nukem has several advantages that the Borderlands 2 Nukem didn't have. One of the most obvious things is that the Nukem in the pre-sequel can take advantage of boosted damage against frozen enemies. So you may find that using the Nukem in Borderlands the pre-sequel is a lot more effective than using the Nukem up against Slag in Borderlands 2. It's also worth mentioning in Borderlands the pre-sequel that the Torgue Nukem has the highest base damage of any Torgue rocket launcher in the game, and since Torgue rocket launchers boost the damage of the flak through passive weapon effects, the Nukem is the best legitimate launcher for this particular purpose. As far as base game weapons are concerned, no other rocket launcher in the pre-sequel can match the Nukem in terms of raw damage. That said, if you have the Claptastic Voyage DLC and you have access to Kanada's Laser, you're going to find that that is going to be a better explosive launcher because it can perform critical hits on pretty much any enemy regardless of what character you're playing. Even still, the Nukem was a decent launcher in Borderlands 2, however, it's probably one of the best launchers in the pre-sequel, and to get one, all you have to do is kill Flame Knuckle at the very beginning of the game. Number 2, the Heartbreaker. This was a gun in Borderlands 2 that was certainly above average. Aside from being a Hyperion shotgun, which are pretty awesome, the Heartbreaker was both a fire elemental weapon and a Moxie weapon that would allow the player to heal for a portion of the damage dealt. While other Moxie weapons in Borderlands 2 like the Ruby and Grog Nozzle had far superior healing capabilities, the Heartbreaker overall was much better balanced. However, in Borderlands the pre-sequel, the Heartbreaker becomes truly ridiculous. While fire weapons greatly suffer in environments that are vacuums, fire weapons are quite powerful in atmosphere-based environments. The Heartbreaker really excels on Athena though. When combined with her Psoronic Storm skill tree and Maelstrom stacks, you can gain a Maelstrom stack for each projectile fired. This means one trigger pull can yield upwards of 7 or 9 Maelstrom stacks, and after unloading several clips, it's very easy to hit 300 or so Maelstrom stacks. This should provide you with about 120% elemental damage boost. And keep in mind that in both Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, elemental bonuses are multiplicative, so having that much bonus is really good. The only issue with this gun is acquiring it in the pre-sequel. While there was a patch that allows previously unobtainable weapons to drop, I'm not sure if the Heartbreaker can actually drop in the game. So if you do want one, you're probably going to have to use a save editor. Otherwise, if it does drop in game, just try any random loot source. Number 1, the IVF. Now, the Babymaker was an amazing TDR SMG from Borderlands 2. It was easily one of the best TDR weapons in Borderlands 2, and it had great reload damage. It was easy to quickly fire and reload like all TDR SMGs, and it also had great ammo consumption compared to something like the TDR E-Tech SMG, which dealt roughly the same reload damage at roughly twice the ammo cost. The disadvantage of the Babymaker was that the child Babymaker grenades would occasionally miss. So you could throw this and sometimes it would miss, and while you could get 2 child Babymakers to spawn, it wasn't quite as frequent as what we see with the IVF. The IVF, on the other hand, allows 2 child Babymakers to spawn on a more frequent basis, and this is because IVF stands for in vitro fertilization, and when IVFs are are done in medical practice, they have a tendency to produce more than just one baby per pregnancy. Unlike in Borderlands 2, I would say the best version of the IVF for Baby Maker is the explosive version. This is because Claptrap can make its synergy with both his load and explode as well as his start with a bang skills. It's easy to deal quite a bit of damage using this method with any Theodore weapon in the pre-sequel, and while I think something like the Laserdiscer is better than the IVF, for the base game, the IVF is probably going to deal the best reload damage of any weapon. If you want an IVF, it has an increased chance to drop from the bosun in Pity's Fall. And keep in mind, you can also get the cryophobia here as well. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like. As always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.